Welcome. Is that how you like to be introduced to a video? By the the one doing the video? What would you call that person? A YouTuber? I'm not a YouTuber. A book reviewer? Do you like them to start the video off by staring you intently and saying welcome? That's how we're starting, so strap in. I can't start it like that. Okay. I do feel like I need to say welcome. Welcome to this video in which I will be going over all the books that I read in the year 2025, which was 24 books to be exact. And my goal every year is to read 24 books, or otherwise breaking down that to 2 books a month. That's usually my goal, and I barely, with I think the last day, or one of the last days of December, was able to read my 24th book. And not all of those were physical copies, and right here I think I've got 16 of the books that I read last year, which I personally own. I prefer to read books with physical copies. I just like the feel, I like the look, I like the way that it translates versus listening. I did listen to about 5 books last year, which I think is the first year that I've ever done audiobooks. I was just in a lot of situations where it was easier to read a book via listening on Spotify as opposed to not having the time to be able to open up a book and spend an hour reading it. I was a little bit more limited in my time this past year, so audiobooks helped me to be able to meet my goal of how many books I read. And I wanted to do this video because I think it's interesting to know what's out there in terms of books, and the way that I come across books are varied. Some come through recommendations. Some I'm very intentional about pursuing and purchasing for a specific study that I'm doing. And then others I will randomly find in either bookstores or there's those free libraries that you'll find in little neighborhoods or towns, which are like the birdhouse things that are not filled with birds or bird seed, but with books. And this top book on here actually, which I guess is what I'll begin with talking about, is Watchman Nee's Spiritual Authority. I found this book in a small town in Illinois called Port Byron, and it was in one of those libraries, one of those free public library birdhouse boxes. It was an interesting find because it has notes and underlinings from whoever had it previously, and I enjoyed that aspect. It felt like I was communicating with the person who had it, who I have no idea who they are. They didn't put their name in it or anything like that. Like I was communicating with the things that they found interesting, and I was able to draw more insight versus just what I read into it myself, which I read an enormous amount into it. And the main principle, I think, from this book is when it comes to it having spiritual authority, that is something that begins with humility and submission. So kind of the opposite of what you would imagine, but as with all truth, it's usually found within paradox. So 2 things that are seemingly contradictory, but actually provide a counterbalance of what is the pure truth. You can scale one side to authoritarian, and you could scale one side to being kissing somebody's butt. And this book really helps to center that balance of having authority and knowing who you are in God and giving due honor to those who are in authority. And I really enjoyed, especially coming from a very authoritarian state like China, where Watchman Nee is from. I found that whole observation that he explains in that book very insightful. Next book here, we've got Blessing or Curse by Derek Prince. This was a book that my mom got for me, but she's a big fan of Derek Prince, always has been, and felt impressed to give this book to me. And I found it very valuable, and there was a lot to gain from it, especially for understanding the book of Deuteronomy, which is almost entirely what this book teaches out of. I can recall one of the most powerful messages I've ever heard was preached on Deuteronomy 28, which is all about God's blessings and his curses, the things that bring on his blessings and the things that bring on his curses. And in that chapter, you learn that there is many more things that can bring curses than there are that bring blessings. But it's really simple to do the things that bring blessings, and you got to kind of go out of your way to get the curses. Next book is, this is my favorite cover. Again, I think I got this from don't tell my mom, I think I stole this from her library. It is such a beautiful cover. I think she gave me approval. I'll say that. The Spiritual Man by Watchman Nee is one of the densest, in a good way, studies on the dynamic of the spirit, soul, and the body. If you don't understand, we are, as individuals, made up of a body that you're looking at right now. We're made out of a soul, which is mostly what you're hearing out of right now. It's things that I have learned from the time that I was born and gone through schooling and had different jobs and education, etc. And the spirit is something that transcends this reality, this realm of existence, and is more so existing in a different plane or a different reality, however you want to configure that in your own understanding. It's the truest part of who we are, and the part that is most valuable going through this life. And we should focus most on our spirit, and the spirit will I look at it like this, and I'm just coming up with this on the spot, but imagine that the ground, the soil, that is our bodies, not too far off. We're made from dust and return to dust. And a tree that's planted in that ground is our soul. And the thing that brings life is the spirit, which comes from the rain, comes from the heavens. That's maybe right, and is the only way that I can think to explain a 1,000-page book. Next book we've got is called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Now, this book, the subtitle of it is Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. I like the picture that it has on here. It's a good illustration about what this book is about. And it helps you to understand the way that other people react when, for lack of a better term, they get triggered or do things out of turn, out of character. Because, and even understanding yourself when you do things that are out of character per your usual behaviors. Because it's tied to deeper roots of your past. Most behaviors are. And that's, I'd say, main thing I gathered from that book. Nothing too deep. Next book is from the pastor of a church my wife and I attend here in Davenport. And it's called Fit to Serve. This book was released this year and is all about health and fitness, but from a spiritual lens, from a pastoral lens. If you're going to do things, as the Bible teaches us, with all your strength as unto God, then you should care about treating your temple correctly. And that's something that a lot of people in the church presently do not take an account for. And there's really no excuse for it. And, it's something that I am wholeheartedly in favor of. And when it comes to something that needs to be taught and instructed for the edification of the saints. The Making of a Leader by Frank Damasio is one of the biggest books I read. It took me a long time to get through it, I think, because it's fairly big pages. I'm kind of a slow reader as it is. And there's a lot of really good information in it in terms of leadership principles that mostly have to do with ministry leadership, but they apply to any domain that you might be in. So me, for instance, working in film and video, I'm able to look at a lot of the principles in this book and apply them to my life. And it's something that through a schooling that I went through over the course of last year in 2024, it was recommended as one of the course books to read. And I'm very glad that I made the purchase, and it's something that I'll probably end up going through again just because of how much information there is in it. I was only able to retain so much first read through at the beginning of last year. Tertullian's Prescription Against Heretics is a book that I got very intentionally for one reason, which is that there is a testament in here about John the Beloved being boiled alive to be killed by being boiled alive and surviving, which is something that is just cool about John the Beloved or John the Revelator, if you prefer that nomenclature, or John the one whom Jesus loved, if you prefer that. It's this book about the early church. They had a lot of heresy, a lot of different factions beginning to break out amongst the early churches with doctrines of demons and false testimonies of who Jesus was. And this was a book coming against all the heresy of the day and recentering the church on the foundation of what the apostles taught and what Jesus taught. And in there's also a very tiny portion in which he goes over talking about John the Beloved's attempted murder by being boiled alive. And he's the coolest. I didn't get to read too much fiction last year, which is a disappointment. I'd say I would have probably read more last year if I sprinkled in more fiction. It's mostly all nonfiction, I think, other than this book, which is Henry Esmond by Thackeray. The History of Henry Esmond by William Makepeace Thackeray. Yeah, this was an interesting fiction novel in the sense that it is written like an autobiography with a mix of third and first person, because you're getting moments where the protagonist and subject, Henry Esmond, is the narrator, and then you get moments where one of his, I believe, grandchildren who is going over his writings is narrating. And the center storyline has to do with there's a lot of dynamics of the class system that existed in England and Ireland in the I think the early 1700s. And I find all that stuff super interesting. I'm a big fan of like the Victorian era and the class dynamics and understanding the politics of that time and place, because I think we've seen, we don't notice it, but there is a lot of that secondhand effect that has come over to America, and so it's good to be able to see how it worked in a more strict system, and to know both the benefits and the downsides of such systems. At the heart of it, though, it's a very heart-wrenching romance novel. And I love the Classic Club book covers. I'm just a sucker for it. That's probably 90% of the reason why I picked this book out of the bookstore to begin with. I've got 4 books here that are all written by the same author, somebody named Greg Crawford, who is an apostle in my life, mentor, and a great inspiration and teacher of the Word and revelation on the spiritual realms. And I'll go in order here of his first book that he wrote, which I think was the last book that I officially read of 2025, called The House of Bethany, which is a book all about creating atmospheres that Jesus wants to rest in. And it's not by doing more, but it's by sitting at his feet. It's the whole illustration of being a Mary or a Martha, and how that looks in a more corporate dynamic of Sunday service, church service. Really good book. I believe this was my wife's favorite book of last year. Next is The Return to Eden. I think this might, we'll see as we keep going. This paired with Watchman Nee's Return to Eden, not Watchman Nee's Return to Eden, Greg Crawford's Return to Eden, might be my favorite book of last year. It explains so well, and so the simple truth of God's intention to bring man back to the place of the Garden of Eden, where God's instruction for man was to be fruitful and multiply and to steward his creation. And it doesn't take too much intellectualizing to understand that when we pass through this life, that is what God wants us to do, and why he would even care about what we do in this life. Because if he wouldn't have given us the parable of the talents, or rather, because he gave us the parable of the talents, we know that he cares about what we steward in this life, and it's because he cares about what we're going to be stewarding in the next life. if you distinguish those as two separate lives. It gets a little complicated because for all we know, it's just going to feel like a continuation. Love's Enduring Flame is a devotional book, and I don't read too many devotional books. I think this might actually be the first one I've ever read, by Greg Crawford. My wife and I, we each had a copy, and so it was a really good book for us to read as we were preparing for marriage and going through marriage and into the first couple months of our marriage, to be reading a book all about love's enduring flame. Because if there's one thing that I know about love, is that those who endure in it will be saved. The Realms of God by Greg Crawford is again close to being my favorite, along with Return to Eden, because it just opens up the vastness of who God is. He's more than we often put him in a box to be. And there is more of what he is and who he is that we don't often think about. And the book here is just talking about how the different aspects of God and how God functions, they come from him, and they come from specific realms in heaven, and why we see sometimes manifestations of certain things, whether it be blessing or healing or provision. It's because there is something from one of those realms that is either in need of or need to display of, that God is pulling down from heaven through his saints to be able to minister to others. Now, I have this book here, which I've read before. I reread it this year. Out of curiosity, just to go back over, it's the most interesting autobiography I've ever read. It's called Memories, Dreams, Reflections by Carl Jung. And it's from his early childhood recollections up to, working as a clinician and figuring out his field of specialty, which is archetypes and symbolism, interpretation of dreams, etc. And I'm going to make a whole separate video about him, so I'm not going to talk anymore about it. I also read his book Answer to Job this year, and I don't have that copy out here because I don't know where it is right now, but it's somewhere lying around the house. And I'm going to do a combined review / essay video about that, because there's a lot of interesting thoughts, and Carl Jung is one of the most complex thinkers, for better and for worse, and I want to get into that and share some of my thoughts about the things that he had to say and the conclusions that he came to through his life's work. Victory Over the Darkness by Neil T. Anderson was a book that a good brother in faith got me out of just the kindness of his heart. I think he actually might have bought one of Greg Crawford's book for me too. His name's Stuart Elliott. If you're watching this, Stuart, thank you for the books, because whether you knew it or not, I am a big book reader, and this was a really good practical application of biblical principles for being able to walk steadfast in your faith, not being just a hearer of the word, but being a doer of it. Ooh, Tender Warrior is a great title, and again, a similar book to, I'd say, Victory Over the Darkness, in the sense that it's taking biblical principles from lived life experience and applying it to your life. And I don't have too much else to say about this book, other than I really love these type hardcovers, and that type on there is really nice. Steve Sampson Discerning and Defeating the Ahab Spirit. I saw Steve Sampson in person at a church here in, I think, Bettendorf, that was a very impactful service where Lord led him to come and prophesy over my wife and I, and he had some books out on display, and this was the one that stood out to me because you often hear people talk about the Jezebel spirit, which is a very real thing, but you don't hear enough people talking about the Ahab spirit. And when it comes to the dynamic of an Ahab and a Jezebel, it's kind of like chicken or the egg, which one came first. But at least for the part of a man, this book on the Ahab spirit and understanding that is probably more critical, because it's easier to analyze and look at yourself and see, am I exhibiting any of these qualities, and to root out any of those things that might lead you to be what people in my generation would call a simp or a beta male. And there's a epidemic of that in our culture right now, of men being told to shut up, sit down, let the woman wear the pants, and let her lead, when that is the role of the man. And that's what, if you read the story of Ahab, you learn that he forfeited his right as king, as the man in not just the relationship, but over a kingdom. What happened when he forfeited that to Jezebel. All right, the other books that I read that are not here, or listened to if you count that as reading, I am for the sake of this, is a book called Movements in America: How God Sparked a Discipleship-Making Movement. I don't have the author listed here. That's a book talking about a strategy of house church networks across the world as a way of making disciples, as opposed to the traditional church model that has people gather in a large congregation once a week to be a part of a service for a couple hours and kind of compartmentalize that as that part of their life, that time of the week, and then the rest of their life is separate. That book talks about a real practical strategy for an alternative to that culture, that church culture in America. Kingdom Centers is another book by Greg Crawford that I did not, or I don't have in my selection here with me right now. It's along the same lines, actually. It's a book about an alternative to the traditional church setting of being a building people attend once a week to essentially stay the same. It's looking at church as being somewhere where people come to get trained, built up, and sent out to do whatever it is that God has called them to do. Oh, this is a fun one. So this is a book I listened to on audio called Discipline and Punishment by Michel Foucault, who is the most popular, I want to say the most prominent voice proponent of postmodern thought and philosophy. And it's one of those books, I like to read books or listen to books sometimes that are contrary to what I believe, so that way I can better fortify against those ideas. You know, the enemy who you know is less scary than the enemy who you don't know. It's kind of along the lines of that principle. So I wouldn't waste your time. It was kind of a slog to listen through, to be honest. And, his main point I guess, is that that's the thing with postmodern thinkers. They don't really have a point. They just kind of go around in circles. And discipline and punishment was pretty, at the end of the book, a completely subjective point of view. The degree to which you do it or don't, or validate it or don't, it was a wash. There were some interesting testimonies that he shared of some horrific punishments in France during the Revolution, but nothing to waste your time on. God's Chosen Fast by an author who I didn't write down here, but I'll put some text down there for you to look into in case you're interested. I think something Murray is his name, and that is a great book about fasting, what should motivate your fast, how you should attempt it. He's actually, in that book, he documents his preparation for it, both physical preparation, mental prep, and spiritual prep, and then I think does a 21 day or some extended time length of just drinking water. The Richest Man in Babylon was a book that I listened to over the course of the summer that had a lot of principles when it came to money and career and skill stacking, saving your money, not spending beyond what your income is. There are a lot of those fundamental principles that I've learned through other books or voices, mentors. But there was an underlying philosophy of selfishness and greed that kind of made the whole book read contrary to my belief system, which is to be generous and obviously use wisdom. But the thing is that sometimes generosity goes against the wisdom of self-preservation. And that book was just pretty much about building your own empire. So, if you got nothing else, it's maybe okay to learn from. Another one of those books that wouldn't recommend, was kind of a slog to listen through, was Sigmund Freud's Theory of Sexuality, that confirmed pretty much all the things that I had already thought about Freud. Being able to discount a lot of his theories. You can tell that there was some trauma. There's some unprocessed trauma actually in Carl Jung's autobiography, he talks at length about his disagreement with Freud that everything is about sex. I mean, I can speak from my point of view too, that very little of what I do, what I'm motivated by, and my purpose in life has to do with sex. Very little. And that's all the books from 2025 that I read or listened through. And I don't think I could pick a single favorite. It's a little hard to do that with books. I also read a lot of the Bible this year too, so yeah, I don't think I got anything else to say. I just kind of wanted to talk about that, because what's the point of reading all these books if you don't share what you're getting out of them? And granted, I do a lot of writing, and I think one of the great benefits of doing a lot of reading is while I don't think it teaches you how to think, you get to learn how other people who are have become experts at thinking and formulating ideas. You can maybe start to take pieces from other people's ideas to formulate your own ideas. And I think that's the benefit of being able to read others and analyze them and be able to share what it is that you got out of them. I guess that's it.